An airliner with 239 people on board vanishes without a trace.
An airliner just disappeared. That's unheard of.
In a search area almost the size of the United States, how do you find a 300-ton jet?
Well, I don't think people realize just how big the world actually is. There's still parts of the ocean that remain uncharted.
What does it mean for the future?
There's going to have to be some kind of safety reporting system that can't be switched off by the crew.
This is the story of the missing Malaysian plane, told by the world's top aviation experts.
Disappearance of Flight 370, not a game changer, it's a world changer.
March 8th, 2014. A Malaysian Airlines plane flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing disappears from radar an hour into its flight, sparking one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. In the days that follow, multiple theories emerge about what happened when flight MH370 disappeared. Terrorism, pilot suicide, mechanical failure, and cyber hijacking. It's a mystery that has gripped the world.
It's perhaps because down deep people still see an airplane flying overhead and don't understand completely that there's physics involved, it's flying, it's fine. There's some miracle about it. So when something goes wrong with that miracle, it's frightening.
So what do we know? The plane took off from Kuala Lumpur at 12:40 a.m. local time on Saturday, March 8th. It was due to arrive in Beijing just over 6 hours later at 6:30 a.m. At 7 minutes past 1, the last signal from the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, or ACARS, which relays technical health checks to the ground, is received. At 1:19, the plane leaves Malaysian airspace. The crew gives their final sign-off. They should now check in with Vietnamese air traffic control, but fail to do so. On the face of it, the crew, seen here as they pass through security at Kuala Lumpur, are a good team. First Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with 18,000 flying hours, has a reputation as a conscientious and professional flyer. Next, the co-pilot, Farik Abdul Hamid. He was on the verge of proposing to his girlfriend, who is also a pilot. The plane they're flying, a Boeing 777, has an excellent track record. It's a favorite among pilots. This Boeing is the world's largest twin-engine passenger jet. It entered commercial service in 1995.
The Boeing 777 is one of the safest aircraft ever to fly. It's the first airliner ever built strictly on a computer. Although it's only twin engine, it's a very large airplane and has very quickly become a very popular airliner with airlines all around the world. They've sold over 1,100 so far and going strong.
At 21 minutes past 1, the cockpit device that sends and receives radar signals, called the transponder, is turned off. Less than 10 minutes later, at 1:30 in the morning, the plane disappears from air traffic control radar. At 2:15 in the morning comes the last sighting on military radar. We now know that after losing contact, Malaysian military radar observes the plane taking a sharp left turn to the west, a maneuver confirmed by the Thai military.
That would seem highly unlikely that an aircraft would be changing its direction as it did without some intervention from somebody. But, someone turned off the equipment, someone reprogrammed the computers to fly it in a different direction. Airplanes don't do that themselves.
This is a crucial moment in working out the fate of the missing plane. Was the crew reacting to an emergency and trying to reach the nearest airport? What was happening on board? Only a week later would it emerge that satellite signals were still being picked up 7 hours after the plane went missing. They were picked up by a British satellite firm called Inmarsat. The last of those signals was at 11 minutes past 8 in the morning.
The airplane was sending information back and forth to the Inmarsat 3F1 satellite over the Indian Ocean. And while it wasn't sending proper messages, it was just sort of sending "I'm alive" pings. One of the things it picked out was the speed of the plane relative to the satellite. And so we know from that information that the plane was traveling at hundreds of miles an hour. It wasn't crashed on the bottom of the ocean or something like that.
In the days that follow, each new clue only seems to deepen the mystery. At its peak, the search will cover a staggering 2.96 million square miles, involve 7 nations, and aviation experts from around the world. Back on March 8, when relatives and friends gather in Beijing to meet flight MH370, they are told the plane has been delayed. Quickly, it becomes apparent this is much more serious. People are taken to a city hotel, but they still don't know what's going on.
Nobody has told us anything. Nobody talks to us except volunteers and hotel staff.
Officials have no idea where the plane is.
We do not have any findings at this point in time. The search and rescue team has started since morning. Everyone has put in an effort, and yet we have not found any wreckage, no wreckage whatsoever.
As Malaysia wakes up, people gather in Kuala Lumpur airport, desperate to learn the fate of friends and family. But nothing is forthcoming. The search starts immediately. The U.S. 7th Fleet joins in, aware time is running out.
As every hour goes by, the search area gets bigger and bigger. A person can survive in the water for at least 72 hours due to sheer willpower. After that, the chances of survival get less and less, and that's what we're concerned with right now.
But what about the plane? If MH370 had ditched in the sea, how long could it stay afloat?
Oh my God, it was a big plane. I heard a big boom just now.
When an Airbus A320 hit a flock of geese and ditched in the Hudson River near Midtown Manhattan in January 2009, it floated for long enough to be secured by boats. All the passengers were rescued.
3 or 4 minutes into the flight, I was sitting in 22A, so the left engine just blew. Fire, flames coming out of it. Looked over the water and we thought we had a chance because, there was some water, and got to give it to the pilot, man. He made a hell of a landing.
But that was on a fairly placid river, not an ocean. Even if the Malaysia jet had ditched as successfully as the Miracle on the Hudson, there was no land nearby. It would be at the mercy of a sea where wind speeds reach 40 miles an hour and the waves can be almost 20 feet high. And if it did reach the surface in one piece, it would take only minutes before it started sinking the 2.5 miles down to the seabed. On day 2, as the search is starting to gather momentum, comes the announcement there is very little hope left of finding people alive.
We have communicated to the family members that after more than 30 hours without any contact with the aircraft, we believe that the family members should prepare themselves for the worst.
Relatives and friends are beside themselves with grief and anger. Without knowing what has happened to their loved ones, the sense of loss intensifies. What follows is one of the biggest and most intense search operations ever mounted for a missing aircraft. The area it covers is vast, millions of square miles. Ships, planes, and submarines from 7 countries scour the sea to find debris and clues. But it soon becomes apparent. This is a mystery unlike any in the annals of aviation. It's day 3 in the hunt for Malaysia Flight 370. Searchers are desperate to find the black boxes, which are critical to finding out what happened. There are actually 2 black boxes, one located at the rear of the plane containing all the technical flight data, and one at the front of the plane recording conversations in the cockpit. Both are essential to knowing the plane's fate. The satellite firm Inmarsat looks again at the signals, or pings, to get a more accurate idea of where the search operation should be looking.
The engineers at Inmarsat have managed to do an incredible analysis that picks out partial information about what the plane was doing. And this is what scientists love. You have partial clues, and it's like a crossword where you've just got a couple of words missing, and you try and make guesses to fill it in, and you can constrain where the plane might have been, but you can't get a specific position.
With no wreckage and no black boxes, the investigation looks elsewhere for clues to what happened. When Malaysia Air Flight 370 disappeared, it vanished suddenly from radar screens, and there was no distress call from the pilot.
It is extremely uncommon for aircraft to disappear.
How often do planes seem to disappear? Almost never.
I think no one can rule out foul play at this stage, and that could be anything from a terrorist attack across to an act of sabotage.
In December 1988, another flight, Pan Am 103, mysteriously disappeared from radar with no distress call. Its wreckage devastated the tiny town of Lockerbie, Scotland. 270 people lost their lives. The evidence pointed to a bomb concealed in a suitcase in the hold, checked in by a passenger who never boarded. The tragedy led to much tighter security across the industry.
After Lockerbie, we saw hold baggage having to be 100% screened, and anything that wasn't reconciled with the passenger would be removed from the aircraft.
The years since Pan Am 103 have seen a deadly race between terrorist bomb innovation and systems developed to counter them. Each new threat has brought new security measures. In 2001, British terrorist Richard Reed unsuccessfully attempted to detonate explosives in his shoes during a flight between Paris and Miami. In 2006, British police uncovered a terrorist plot to detonate liquid explosives in 10 airliners traveling from the United Kingdom to the US and Canada. And in 2010, powder explosives were found hidden in printer cartridges on a UPS cargo plane at East Midlands Airport in England.
After the Richard Reed incident, a new methodology, we all had to start taking our shoes off. The liquid bomb plot, and we all know the absolute chaos that caused with taking liquids on board an aircraft. So new protective measures have to be put into place.
Could it be that a new generation of terrorist bomb took out flight MH370?
We still could find that there has been an explosive device that has been used by a terror group to get control of the plane. We've seen powder explosives on the printer bomb. We've got mobile phones on planes that can potentially put in bombs, and we've got small amounts of liquid. So we could have a bomb maker in Malaysia that is supporting an international terror group.
But there is evidence to suggest that MH370 could not have exploded like the Lockerbie plane.
Lockerbie disappeared off the air traffic control secondary radar, but the bits falling out of the sky, bits of aluminium fluttering down, could still be seen on primary radar. In the case of MH370, the Malaysian military saw the aircraft, but it didn't disappear for them. They kept on seeing it. They watched it go somewhere. They didn't watch anything fluttering to the ground.
The failure of the air and sea search to find any wreckage around MH370's last known location suggested a bomb had not brought down the plane. But if a sudden devastating explosion was not responsible, what was? The investigation now focused on air traffic control's secondary radar and a radio device located in the cockpit of the 777 called the Transponder.
A transponder is a way for air traffic control to more accurately track aircraft under its control. A transponder is actually a box in the aircraft, and it responds to a radar. When the radar energy sweeps across the aircraft, the transponder will receive that energy and then respond back with a signal. Air traffic control uses this information to accurately identify your radar blip on their screen and to know what altitude you're at.
When MH370's transponders stopped transmitting at 1:21 a.m. on Sunday, March 8th, the plane disappeared from air control radar screens. Did the part fail, or was it physically switched off?
It would be highly unlikely that the transponder would turn itself off. As pilots, we're always trained that the transponder should be on, especially when we're taking off, and not to forget it. So it would take a physical action to turn the switch to off.
If the transponder was switched off, who was responsible and why? Could it be a hijacking?
If we find that MH370 was indeed hijacked through traditional methods, then that's something that Malaysians will have to look at internally, and within the region and across the globe we're going to have to look at, is what we're doing right now good enough to prevent a hijacker boarding an aircraft?
Early in the investigation, it was announced that 2 passengers had boarded the plane under assumed identities.
We have the CCTV's recording of those passengers from check-in right to the departure point.
Paria Nur Mohammed Murad and Syed Mohammed Reza Delavar were photographed boarding the flight using stolen passports. The stolen passports had been recorded on Interpol's Stolen and Lost Travel Documents database, but both airport and airline staff had failed to make the necessary checks. An international police operation soon tracked down the genuine passport holders. The 2 suspects turned out to be Iranian, raising questions of whether there might be a link to terrorism in the Middle East.
Based on the evidence, the airplane didn't crash where it lost its signals. All of the evidence leads to a conclusion that there was human intervention. The electronic equipment was turned off. That equipment does not fail, not that way. A human had to intervene.
But then, a surprise announcement. The Malaysian police declared that one of the suspects was an asylum seeker.
We believe that he is not likely to be a member of any terrorist group. And we believe that he is trying to migrate to Germany.
Since visa requirements were eased for Iranian nationals traveling to Malaysia, the country has become a hub for Iranians looking for ways to emigrate to Europe. But if it was a hijacking, how could an intruder have gained access to the cockpit? Since 9/11, flight deck doors have been reinforced, now bullet and axe-proof, to prevent intruders, giving pilots time to make a distress call. In the absence of any tangible evidence to explain the plane's disappearance, new theories emerge, including cyber terrorism.
The cyber attack would be a highly sophisticated attack, which at the moment would seem the most unlikely, but that's only because we haven't seen it before. The day before 9/11, we never would have imagined that an aircraft would have been used effectively as a cruise missile to attack New York and Washington.
In 2011, the Iranian government released these pictures of a downed U.S. military drone. They claimed that it had been brought down by their cyber warfare unit.
the drone's controls were taken over. The drone thought it was going back to its home landing. High deception using satellites and commands through to the computers. A cyber hijack really is a new form of warfare, and it's taking us into cyberspace where actually all forms of warfare are now concentrating on.
But is it possible that something as large and sophisticated as a Boeing 777 could be remotely hijacked?
I've seen evidence from an aircraft manufacturer not too long ago that would indicate it is possible, and I believe that it's something that the agencies within the region and Boeing must be looking at very seriously.
A cyber hijack is an act of taking over control. People within the passenger cabin may be able to enter into these systems by hacking through the entertainment systems, or there may have been airside access through the maintenance windows. And a pre-programmed plot timed to actually simulate the pilot's activities has taken that plane off course and actually controlled every action of that plane, and potentially may have lost the plane or could have landed the plane.
I honestly don't think a computer hacker could have taken control of the aircraft. Perhaps it's possible. I really doubt that. The systems on board these aircraft are so sophisticated, and they're designed to be as safe as humanly possible. To have a door open in their computers for that, I would find highly unlikely.
5 days after its disappearance, the White House makes a startling announcement. A satellite has picked up information from the plane in the form of an electronic pulse, or ping, which indicates that the flight may have continued for up to 4 hours after it disappeared from air traffic control's radar.
They know it came from the aeroplane, but it wasn't like a transponder response which gave a whole load of identification. They just happened to know that it was that aircraft, but there was no information in this ping. It was just a ping.
The Malaysian government also confirms that their primary radar records show the plane did deviate from its flight path. But each new piece of evidence raises a new question. If the plane changed direction, where was it heading? And if it continued to fly, why did it maintain radio silence? By day 9 of the investigation of Malaysian flight MH370, there are still more questions than answers. Malaysian officials have confirmed a left turn shortly after the final radio transmission from the cockpit. Sudden turns from passenger jets in flight are extremely rare and show that the pilots had actively switched off the autopilot. But why? Could it have been an attempt to commandeer the plane with malicious intent? Or was the crew of MH370 undertaking a desperate effort to get back to land and save the lives of the passengers on board? Some experts are taking seriously the theory that there could have been a catastrophe on board.
I'm still leaning towards some kind of accident, some kind of engineering problem, some kind of problem with cargo releasing gas or catching fire.
I believe at that stage there was some form of catastrophic failure on the aeroplane, either a decompression or perhaps an electrical fire which incapacitated the flight crew. I think the flight crew probably made a valiant effort to get the aeroplane onto a new course to safety.
Pilots are trained to know where their safest landing strip would be in case of an emergency. For Captain Shah, this would not have been Kuala Lumpur because it would have meant flying over an 8,000-foot high ridge. Instead, he would have been making for another airport at Pulau Langkawi.
My belief is that an experienced pilot like the captain of this aircraft would know instantly that he had smoke in the flight deck, that he would have to get to land as soon as possible. The nearest land to him was to the left, off to the west, and I believe he probably turned on to 270 degrees while he tried to resolve the fire issue, heading back towards land and getting ready for an emergency landing.
A fire on board an aircraft would wipe out the transponder and ACARS system, which send flight location and technical data about the aircraft back to base via satellite.
Whatever his attempts were, I believe that he probably lost consciousness before he could carry them out successfully, and the rest of the flight was carried out on autopilot, with the autopilot functioning as it would without any form of monitoring.
So was a fire the real culprit? It's been reported that the plane was carrying over 400 pounds of lithium-ion batteries, which can be flammable, in its hold. The accident theory still leaves open the question of why the pilots didn't send a distress call. And with no physical evidence to go on, it can only be a theory. Since the Boeing 777 entered service, the aircraft fleet has accumulated more than 18 million flight hours and has gained a safety record that is second to none.
Well, the Boeing 777 is one of the safest aircraft ever to fly. It is remarkably safe.
But even on the 777, mechanical failures are not unheard of.
Mayday, mayday. Aircraft accident, aircraft accident. Type is a 777. Natural problem is crash.
Despite its safety record, one Boeing 777 did crash in 2008. A mechanical fault in the fuel line of British Airways Flight 38 caused ice crystals to form in the fuel system. Both engines lost power and failed on its final approach to London's Heathrow Airport. The aircraft just made it onto the runway. No one died, but it would have been a very different story if the plane had failed earlier when in mid-flight. One of the survivors of that crash was former lecturer Paul Stafford.
The oxygen mask fell from the roof of the aircraft, and we seemed to be skidding for an eternity, bumping and bashing around. I smashed my head in the front of the seat. I buckled my body in half. My chest was hurting. We eventually stopped, and it was completely quiet. I looked to my left, and the undercarriage had come through the wing. And at that point, the captain did say, "Evacuate, evacuate." And that's the first moment I realised how serious it had been.
On day 8 of the MH370 investigation, the British satellite company Inmarsat reveals that the plane did not vanish. Their satellite made contact with the plane while it was in the air, strongly suggesting the plane had flown on for a further 7 hours.
The Inmarsat satellite was still logged on to the plane, and so you still got these pings once an hour where the Inmarsat satellite was basically saying, "Do you have any more ACARS info for me?" And the plane's going, "Got nothing."
Working from data provided by the ping conversation between plane and satellite, it takes investigators a further 9 days to conclude that MH370 had probably ditched somewhere in the vast expanse of the Indian Ocean. There's just one problem. With no confirmed course and 7 more hours of potential flight time, the search area now covers millions of square miles. Finding a plane that vanished over open ocean might seem impossible, but it's happened before. In June 2009, Air France 447, an Airbus A330 carrying 228 people on board, disappeared over the Atlantic. A relatively minor mechanical failure was the catalyst for a fatal event.
The Air France A330 that went down over the Atlantic, they didn't know for a while, but they were able to find within 5 days some parts of the aircraft, so they knew where it went down.
They were actually able to find floating debris from that incident because they had more data from the airplane. They were able to narrow down the location of where that aircraft, the last position of that aircraft, a lot more closely.
Aircraft crash investigator Colleen Keller was a key figure in the search for Flight 447, but the initial search area was much smaller than the one for MH370.
We had a search area that was a 40-mile radius, and the way that we determined that search area, it was a circle, was that we had a last known point reported by the ACARS system on the aircraft The next report should have come 4 minutes later, and it was never received, indicating that the aircraft went into the water at some point during that 4-minute period.
From this information, investigators were able to draw a 40-mile circle, which equated to 5,000 square miles of open water to search. Even so, their task was made much simpler than finding MH370, which continued to fly south long after the plane's ACARS system had stopped working.
That's thousands of square miles. It's 10, 100 times the search area for the Air France search.
Satellite ping communication has revealed that MH370 probably flew toward the Indian Ocean. Investigators now hope satellite photos can help them find wreckage. That is considerably harder than it sounds, even in a world that seems constantly monitored by satellite.
The problem with looking for pieces of debris in the open ocean is you have an area that's not high contrast. Here's what I mean by that. It's possible to look and see very tiny features in satellite images, but it helps to have very high contrast. In other words, if you have a very reflective object against a very black background, that kind of object will be very visible and it'll be easy to identify. Well, the open ocean isn't like that. You've got objects that are maybe floating in the ocean, might be just beneath the surface. You've got sun reflecting off the waves. So it's not an environment where it's really easy to pick out small objects that might be floating there.
After many false starts, and with no positive ID on any debris, investigators turned their attention back to the pilots. Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah had joined Malaysia Airlines in 1981.
This is a YouTube video that I made as a community service.
An aviation fanatic, he had even built a flight simulator in his home, which mirrored the setup of the Boeing 777 he was piloting. Could this have offered any further clues to Malaysian authorities?
We took possession of a simulator, of a flight simulator, and we have dismantled it from the home, and we have assembled it at our office, and we are getting experts to look at it now.
Have him check and fix the leakage.
They reveal that data on the simulator had been deleted before the captain took control of the flight.
When files are deleted from a simulator, it may mean that the size of the files is so large that one cleans the system as one goes. But the authorities are getting those files unlocked. They will undelete them, and that may take a little time. But forensically, that is going to be very exciting for the investigation, because it may show exactly the types of very innocent assessments that pilot was doing, or it may show an intention, for a psychological reason perhaps, to create this different pathway that this plane has gone.
Even without the data from his simulator, investigators are about to discover startling new information about Captain Shah. Nine days into the hunt for Malaysia Airlines MH370, the mystery of what happened in the cockpit deepens. Previously believed to have been a proud father and grandfather with a secure and happy marriage, it emerges that Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah's wife had left him just hours before he took off from Kuala Lumpur. Experts shift the focus of their investigation to Shah's psychological profile.
Perhaps they have a theory that, he was very, very depressed, and therefore he caused the aircraft to crash. That might be one theory. And so they might be trying to ascertain, was he really depressed at the time, and what would be reasons that would be causing him to want to take his life.
Chris Neeson, a fellow pilot and close friend of Shah's, finds it hard to believe that he would crack under emotional strain.
He was one of the original 777 fleet captains. He's a great guy, just a great pilot. I think it attests to his experience. It was 18,000 hours of flying, great career. With his character and what we knew of him, it just wouldn't make any sense that he would have anything to do with any sort of deliberate action on his part.
There are questions, too, about the character and professionalism of 27-year-old co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid. It's revealed that he had broken flight rules by inviting 2 women into the cockpit during a flight from Phuket to Kuala Lumpur in 2011.
The areas that are going to be looked at is the sort of almost the roguish nature of the first officer that's being portrayed in the press in terms of his affairs with girls and things like that. But I think that still turn out just to be a young man with normal desires.
Concerns about Hamid's mental state are downgraded when news breaks that he was about to propose to his girlfriend. Still, the question remains, could either pilot have decided to kill themselves, taking the plane and everyone on board with them? Attention turns to 2 recent cases of such suspected pilot suicide. The first happened in 1997, when a Silk Air flight went down in Indonesia, killing 104 people. U.S. investigators said the pilot had probably crashed the jet on purpose. The U.S. findings contradicted an Indonesian investigation that rejected suicide theory. Just 2 years later, in 1999, 217 people died when their Egypt Air flight from New York plunged into the Atlantic Ocean. Again, U.S. investigators concluded pilot suicide by First Officer Gamil al-Batouti. But Egyptian investigators have consistently disputed this. DNA evidence was found that supported the U.S. view.
The physical evidence that was available to the investigators included the fact that there was only 1 pilot's DNA on the flight deck. The flight deck door was locked at the time of the accident. The other pilot's DNA was on the far side of the cockpit door, as was the fire axe.
Did this scenario play out on the flight deck of MH370? Could the pilot or co-pilot have locked the other out of the cockpit and taken over the plane with malign intent, leaving their colleagues struggling to break down the reinforced security door? We may never know. But on April 2nd, Malaysian police announced that they have ruled all passengers out of their investigation, narrowing their inquiry to cabin and cockpit crew only. As the search for psychological clues to the mindsets of the pilot and co-pilot continue in Malaysia, the hunt for wreckage goes on in the Indian Ocean, using a system that was employed to find Air France 447 in 2011.
Air France 447 went down in the middle of the Atlantic. We performed a technique called probability mapping, and it's a way to assemble uncertain information, often conflicting information, into a single probability map, hot indicating high probability that the target is there, and cold where you shouldn't bother looking. Based on that latest map, they were able to find the wreckage on the bottom at 10,000 feet.
It took 2 years for searchers to find the Air France Airbus A330 and its black box recorders in 5,000 square miles of the Atlantic. At its largest, the hunt for MH370 covers just under 3 million square miles, an area roughly the size of the United States. By the beginning of April, searchers from 7 nations are combing an area reduced by probability mapping to 94,500 square miles. Still 19 times the area of the Air France search, and a zone the size of Britain. Answers lie at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, where depths can reach over 26,000 feet, as deep as Mount Everest is high. Even as the search continues, many wonder How will this incident change the future of aviation? By the beginning of April 2014, the exhaustive search for Malaysia Flight 370 has turned up many tantalizing leads, but no wreckage and no black box. Experts agree that to have any definitive answer for what happened, they have to locate the plane. And the more days that pass, the harder it becomes.
The recording of flight data is very critical for accident investigations, and this includes basic information about altitude, airspeed, heading, but more importantly, the sounds that were occurring in the cockpit. So one could hear if there's an intruder in the cabin or if there were some sort of unusual action being taken in the cockpit.
To find it, if it's gone underwater, one of the things that you would use is this beacon here, which emits a signal for at least 30 days. You have to have some idea of where the accident site is. So depending on things like the depth of the water, temperature of the water, you may be able to pick this up from only about 5 miles away. But we're talking about a large area of sea here. You have to have a pretty good idea where you're looking, or you have to be very lucky.
For weeks, searchers scour some 3 million square miles looking for debris from MH370, but find nothing. Despite an intensive international effort, the only firm conclusion is that the plane went down somewhere in the Indian Ocean. But even without a clear answer to this mystery, MH370 has already sparked ideas to prevent future disappearances.
One issue that's already being discussed, and I think it's one of the outcomes of the Air France 447 case, is really looking at the underwater locator beacons. These are pingers on the black boxes. Right now the battery life's only 30 days, so I think longer term batteries on the pinger, so you can go from 30 days maybe to 60 or 90 days life, that would aid in the search.
Another idea is a new kind of black box that can eject itself from a falling plane.
There's now a lot of interest in having a new generation of systems where possibly the aircraft would actually eject a recording unit before impact. So the aircraft would have some sort of system that would recognize that there's an excessive rate of descent and a crash would be imminent, and then it would eject a unit that would both serve as a emergency locator as well as a recording of the critical events of the aircraft before impact.
Perhaps the biggest lesson of MH370 is how easily planes can disappear over open ocean. Already, aviation experts are recommending changes to prevent commercial aircraft from dropping off the map in the future.
Well, the missing link that we didn't have in this search that would really have helped us out is some way to keep track of the aircraft. There are devices out right now, satellite-based GPS trackers that people use when they're hiking, or general aviation aircraft will use them. And these very easily obtained commercial units could be formalized and used on these aircraft to provide continuous tracking around the world.
Another future recommendation may be to data link all civil aircraft in flight. This would network all planes in the sky together to cover the blind spots in aircraft tracking revealed in the hunt for MH370.
There's going to have to be some kind of safety reporting system that sends radio signals back that can't be switched off by the crew, and that is protected in much the same way that a black box is protected, so that if there's some onboard fire, it also doesn't get cut off immediately.
It may take years for these new technologies to become accepted and implemented. And even then, none will help solve the enduring mystery of Malaysia 370. For the families and friends of the missing, it's an agonizing dilemma with no end in sight.
As a searcher, what we need to know is where do we need to start looking under the water. Right now, that's what's really hampering our efforts. We have no impact point on the water.
In March 2014, a Boeing 777-200, one of the safest aircraft ever built, vanished. With its 239 passengers and crew, seemingly without leaving a trace. Unless some sign of it is found, we may never know its fate, and that of all on board.
It's going to take a long time to find physical evidence and understand what went on with this aircraft. Right now, we really don't know, and it's almost impossible to estimate how long it's going to take to solve this riddle.